This time, I call to order the second public hearing for the fiscal year 2026 millage rate. I now turn this portion of the meeting over to Interim Superintendent Dr. Taylor for him and his staff to give us an overview of the fiscal year 2026 tentatively adopted millage rate.
Thank you, Chair Dr. Simmons. We are here today to hold the second of 3 required public hearings on the fiscal year 2026 millage rate. As you know, the board approved the budget at the May 15th, 2025 business meeting. Chief Financial Officer, Masana Mallard, would you please come up to the podium and give us an overview of the millage rate?
Good evening, Chairperson Dr. Simmons, board members, Dr. Taylor. Can you hear me? Good evening. I'm supposed to be on this. That's good. Okay, how about that? Good. All right, thank you. Okay. Good evening again, Chairperson. Has to be this one? Okay. Thank you. All right, we'll try this one. Good evening again, Chairperson Dr. Simmons, board members, and Dr. Taylor. Once again, I'm pleased to be with you to present the GCPS 2026 Budget 2025 Property Tax Millage Rate information. This is our second public input hearing for the 2025 Property Tax Millage Rate process. This provides an opportunity to in this second meeting to really supplement some of the information based on questions we received earlier today. And looking at our Georgia statutes, it's really an important reminder that this process is a requirement under state law. And according to, for example, if millage rates exceed rollbacks, it must be advertised, and 3 meetings, public hearings must be held, which is of course in accordance with what we are doing tonight. And then some key 2026 budget activities. We've adopted a tentative millage rate, received the final 2025 digest information from the county, determined the budget needs with stakeholder input. We estimated property tax revenue, finalized the projected revenue. Of course, as you know, the millage rate was tentatively lowered by 0.2 mils, or 0.2 of a mil, from 19.10 mils to 18.90 tentatively. That was done or adopted on May 15th, 2025. And so what is a millage? A millage rate is used to calculate property taxes and represents an amount of tax per 1,000 of a property's assessed value. For example, properties with a market value of $400,000 and an assessed value of $160,000, or 40% of market value, with a rate of 5 mils applied, that would be an annual property tax of $800. Of course, this is a very simplistic illustration. This is a list of the exemptions we commonly provide. This is actually a link to or a picture of the full county website showing the tax commissioner's list of exemptions. We also have this information, but just for the exemptions related to school exemptions in our public budget documents as well. So you're free to look at that on our district's website, but it includes, for instance, regular homestead exemptions, the school, the disabled, the veteran, the public service employee, the homestead exemption, the disability, and some of the senior exemptions. Now looking at our current 2025 millage rate digest and 5-year history again, here we see the 2025 millage rate, and of course, for your reference to the right, I've noted some areas in green. We'll walk through them again. Starting with real and personal property, the overall growth was 8%. Overall growth in the digest was 7.99%. The homestead exemptions, something to keep an eye on, increased 19.6%, and then total exemptions increased 17.99%. And then, of course, bottom line, our net taxes to be collected estimated at 5.3%. Now, of course, this is from certified to certified, or certified to certified through the estimated, which is projected. In terms of some of the information that was shown this morning, we had a request also to take a look at what it would look like if we had to lower the millage rate to 18.80 and then even further 18.70. And so that information is in this additional slide number 7, and it shows that at 18.8 the increase would be 4.8%, and at 18.7 the increase would be about 4.2%, an exchange of about 53 million versus 47 million. And so this slide, really it shows what we recommend in terms of adopting the millage rate. And it also, of course, shows the inclusion of the debt service and what that would total. So because of this additional revenue, which we'll talk about later on, we're considering the additional 1/10 of a mil or 0.1 of a mil, and that will bring us to 18.8 mils, resulting in a total rate of 20.25. This now includes, at the bottom, a little bit kind of grayed out, an estimate with an 18.7 mil reduction. That would then, of course, total 20.15. Again, this is a summary of our FY25 financial considerations, and in this particular slide, we look at some of the things we would have to consider on an annual basis in terms of assessing what we can do towards lowering property taxes. And so, we take a look at the projected revenues, we look at our budget service and our fund balances, and of course, we consider other things in terms of feedback, and of course, the community's request to lower property taxes. This is a reminder of our adopted budget. Operating budget is $2.7 billion. And then on the right really is a recap of the investments we've made since 2019 all the way up to 2026 in the general operating budget. Some of these costs and these mandatory costs in some cases and some of these investments, were pretty significant from year to year. And so we are at $2.7 billion as a result of the investments made. This, of course, is our strategic budget alignment, showing our budget for the FY2026 called out specific strategic goal alignment, so goals and objectives, and then, of course, all of that is tied to our overall strategic priorities and goals. In addition to which, we also aim to focus, I think, mostly on some of the initiatives in our implementation focus areas, and of course, these are college and career readiness, each and every student, literacy and academic excellence, and safe and welcoming schools. This is an example of the usual house property tax representations we've been showing through the budget process, and earlier today, we showed our estimate now with a projection of the homeowner tax impact if property taxes were capped at 3% versus what we are now proposing, 18.8 mils. And with the 18.8 mils, the increase to the digest was 5%. The increase now, in the case of us lowering that mill, would be $28.40 versus the cap would be $15.28. So it's pretty close, not there yet, but it's pretty close. In terms of looking at what that would look like with an 18.7 mil, the result is, as shown below, it's actually lower than the 3% cap at $12.40 versus $15. And now looking at some of our county data, and overall property value reassessments increased about 6.4%, and growth and development increased about 1.6% from 2024 to 2025. But note the details on the data slide. To the right, the percent changes, some of the things to note: residential grew about 8.81%, commercial about 7%. Mobile homes up 13.55%. In this slide, we've made some enhancements, again, also since this morning. This slide, of course, compares the millage rates and the percent of property taxes to local revenue and percentage of general operating revenue for large 5 school districts, including Gwinnett. For this first top representation we talked about this morning, it is sorted by the 2025 property taxes, showing that the highest is DeKalb at 22.8. We fall to number 3, slightly above Cobb at 18.7, and then Fulton at 17.1. And then over to the right, you'll notice we also added Dr. Simmons, the per pupil expenditures that you requested for each district. And it still contains the information in terms of the changes to the budget. Down below would show what the estimates would be if we looked at lowering again to 18.7. So we would be pretty much, in a tied 3rd spot with Cobb County Schools. This, of course, is a representation of the reductions over time in the millage rates and the investments in those reductions over the years starting in 2019, and you can see a consistent trend line downward, indicating the points over, this period in which Gwinnett County Public Schools stood true to its promise of assessing its position to be able to offer property tax relief. And so in all of these reductions, it has been consistent, and at this point, with the projection at 18.8, this is obviously what it would look like. Are there potential drawbacks? There are always drawbacks so that we have to consider. And, we looked at obviously things such as our state and federal cuts, potential cuts, what would happen if lower than expected revenues, delays in tax collections, any major economic events, and what is the long-term stability factor. So all of those things are things that you would consider normally. In terms of advantages of lowering the millage rate, we also looked at the advantages it brings. So lowering the millage provides financial relief for homeowners, potential economic growth, fostering positive community conditions, and as we know, if families thrive, then our students thrive, so it's kind of a cycle. So what do we think favors us lowering the millage rate? At this point, our budgeted tax digest compared to actual forecast shows a significant additional revenue coming in with the surplus funds. This, of course, our ending FY2025 budget with surplus funds will add to fund balance, of course, growing our fund balance again. This, of course, coupled with some of the internal measures we've taken in terms of reducing spending and optimizing efficiencies, really gives us an opportunity to start thinking about lowering the millage rate. And then, of course, we will receive probably more revenue than budget because we are usually very conservative. But our fund balance continues to grow, and our position is stable but strong. And so, of course, this is recommendation 18.8 as made earlier today. This is also just focusing on the areas that we tend to align the work that we're doing in this process of developing the millage rate, specifically to areas within our strategic plan and some of the goals and objectives therein, and that's obviously, as you can see, listed here. I'm not going to read them out. Next steps, we would like to hold our 3rd public hearing on the millage rate. That will be on August 13th. Obviously, once we finish that millage rate hearing, I think some of the community feedback as well as all of the board discussions will then allow the board and the district to consider facts and conditions and, of course, make final recommendations in order for the board to be able to trust in the decision that they will make on August 13th to set a final millage rate. Once that's done, then we would follow up with the packaged information to the county, so that then they can include it in the final digest submissions to the state. This is also just information for our viewers especially. We have always a reminder to visit our budget webpage, take a look at the resources that are out there. What's even better now is even with all of the additional resources, we've organized them, and I think into more, into a much user-friendly version. You know, you can really see all of the areas of budget information and then millage tax information, SPOS. So we're getting better, and feedback is helpful. Once again, thank you, Dr. Simmons, members of the board, Dr. Taylor. This concludes my presentation, and I turn it back over to you, Dr. Simmons.
Thank you so much, Ms. Millard. We do have one person that has signed up to comment. So at this time, I'll call Kay Vickers to the microphone.
Hello again. I've been here before to talk about, or to be heard, I should say, about this issue. First, let me be very candid and honest by saying that I've, taken up my grievance with the Gwinnett County Tax Assessor's Office already and filed my appeal for my property taxes. So we'll see how that goes. But as far as this meeting is concerned and the topics that we're discussing, I will say thank you. I do appreciate you compromising with the data that she's just presented to us as far as the millage rate is concerned. But I do have to also point out that it's a bit disingenuous to present numbers to us while simultaneously practicing fiscal irresponsibility. And what I mean by that is it's 2025, and within the last 5 years, you've released 2 separate superintendents who you've had to pay after they left. And candidly speaking, that's our money, all of our money that we've had to pay to people who don't work here anymore. And so I think more importantly for me is one of the lines that, I cannot pronounce her name and I apologize, but one of the things that she did say was that one of the priorities of Gwinnett County Public Schools is safety for students. Every time I come up here representing the Grayson cluster. My oldest daughter graduated in 22, my youngest daughter is a junior. The building is built for 3,000 kids, and there's about 3,700 that attend the school. It's not safe. If they have a fire, if the building really does catch on fire, there's gonna be a problem. And I find it strange that you're willing to ask us for more money or to make compromises on our end when it comes to money, but you have no plans for any new schools. You opened a new school this year in the Archer cluster for a new middle school. But besides that, you have no way to alleviate the overcrowding at various schools, but particularly my daughter's school. And so when you don't have things within your plan for how you're going to make a difference with people's money, then you get the pushback that you receive about trying to take more money from people. I'm not naive. Property schools are what pay for taxes. Property taxes are what pay for schools. I'm not naive. I understand that. But at the same time, be fiscally responsible with people's money. Your money too, because if you live in Gwinnett County, which I'm sure all of you do, you pay taxes just like I do. So I'd appreciate if you would just consider that there are things within the system that really do need to be addressed before we're on the news for the wrong reasons. So I get it. Yes, you have to do what you have to do, but be fiscally responsible. Pay attention, because it's going to be bad soon. And I get it with all the things that are going on in politics and coming down from the feds to the states. I understand it. But at the same time, we have to do our due diligence with our own money in order for this process to move smoothly. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Vickers. I now turn it over to my board colleagues for any questions and or comments.
Thank you, Chairwoman Simmons. I have a few questions for Ms. Millard. Thank you. I'm going to echo a lot of what I said at the 11 a.m. hearing, but I just want to start off with slide 8. So the district has a plan to reduce the millage rate to an additional tenth of a mil. Could you shed light on what that means for property taxpayers?
You meant this one, correct? 8?
Yes, slide 8.
Okay. By reducing the mill from our tentative rate, which is now 18.9 to 18.8, so it's a tenth of a mil, would be a $6 million reduction. So this is a much easier amount to manage a loss in terms of what we potentially will be getting in additional revenue, plus other factors, fund balance and other things that we've mentioned before. Significantly growing the fund balance has also helped our financial position. Building in contingencies within the appropriated budget each year allows for us to be prepared for things. Perfect example we mentioned before was even preparing for the sunsetting of ESSER funds, or even, with the new administration, thinking that most federal funding programs will probably either be cut entirely or significantly, modified in some ways. So there's going to be some financial impact. And these are the things you look at in terms of planning, not just for today and the next year, but, 5 to 10 years after that.
Okay, thank you. And you mentioned that the district has anticipated current or possible federal funding loss. I'm hearing from stakeholders where they're asking, why is the district recommending decreasing the millage rate, which then provides property taxpayers relief, when there is this potential threat of loss of federal funding that impacts our most vulnerable students, our economically disadvantaged, our homeless youth, our foster youth. And then can you clarify what it means when the millage rate is lowered? What is that impact? So you mentioned the impact on the school. You anticipate a loss. What is the impact on taxpayers? What are they going to see?
So in this slide, for instance, I'll go back to the house, the 3 houses. This is where we're illustrating what a homeowner in 2024 with a property of $400,000 with a millage rate of 19.10, if we were to lower the millage rate by, in the first green box below, 18.8, the reduction in that millage rate with the 5% growth would have resulted in a taxpayer having an increase in their taxes of $28. Taking that now and comparing it to a 3% cap on the assessed growth, no change in the millage rate from what was adopted at that point, and the rate of the increase, there's still going to be an increase, is $15. So between the 28 and the 15, there's not much of a big difference anymore because of that lowering of that millage rate by what would be 0.3 of a mil at this point. And then, of course, the box on the left for this one with the green is if the mills were lowered to 18.7 using the same method, then the result of that would be an increase of $12 to the taxpayer versus the cap. So it's even lower than the cap.
Okay, thank you. My next question is around slide 10. You kind of mentioned the blueprint, the strategic plan, and it's a little hard to see, but so some key alignment points. I see the increasing, this is something I didn't catch at 11 a.m., increasing safety and security around detection system. And I see that the funding source is capital. And so I guess my question is, I'm trying to wrap my mind around this. How does this translate with the millage rate and the discussion that we're having now? And how is it different from other funding sources like SPLOST?
So the property tax millage rate is part of your general operating budget, your general fund. The capital SPLOST programs, that's your capital fund, so it's two completely different funds. The SRO, I think, equipment, so weapons detection, those things, and if you remember some recent board agenda items, consent items, those are SPLOST funded. Those will be SPLOST funded. And so that's capital. And then, of course, when you look at some of the other, there's a state grant there accounted for under state grant funding. But as you look through the rest of the investments, and of course it's a long list, again, our viewers, it's on our website, it's a long list, and you'll see all of the general fund investments.
Okay. Thank you so much. I have one more question. I'm going to reference slide 14. I appreciate the additional chart. So what we're looking at is the millage rate in comparison to other Metro Atlanta school districts. And I always like that we have this breakdown. And in looking at this, if we were to lower, I see in the second box or the second chart, some predictions if we were to lower our millage rate to align with Cobb. So this goes back to my question at the 11 a.m. I wonder if there is a correlation between salary schedules and the millage rate, since it's tied to property taxes, which then goes, my understanding, to the general fund, which helps fund our teachers, our bus drivers, our coaches. So I wonder if we were to lower it to, again, if there's some type of correlation. And I guess my question is around, I'm hearing from stakeholders, this idea of the district's plan to prioritize salaries as it relates to other Metro Atlanta districts, and how are we competitive? I know that we have the HR salary study coming. I would like to see more of a developed plan with timelines around prioritizing our, not just our teachers, but our paraprofessionals, nurses, and staff.
Well, I do believe that that work is underway, so I'm sure that Chief Harden, I know she's probably not here this evening, she was here earlier. I know that she will probably be getting information somewhere down the road.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Chief Millard, for your presentation. Very thorough. I appreciate the additional information on the additional tenth of a mil reduction. And I think that gets us more in line. I guess the thing that I was reflecting on as you were going through this process this evening is, in May, we did our budgeting process. And we looked at all the needs of the district, the needs including our teachers, including what we pay them, paraprofessionals, all the support staff, what we pay for transportation. We put all that together, we came up with a budget that was a little less than 5% larger than last year. And I think the key to what I'm hearing is that now we're talking about the funding of that budget based upon what we know is coming from the Gold Dome, our way, and now from our county assessor's office. And what we're able to do is we're able to say to our taxpayers that while your real property appreciated 8%, we're not going to take 8%. We're going to take less than 5% in order to fund our operations that are based upon our priorities that we determined back in May. And so I want to say thank you for your team looking at where all of our funds come from, not reacting in a knee-jerk fashion to some of the things that may or may not happen down the road, but you have carefully planned our approach, and you've given us some options to consider. And so to see that a additional 10th mil reduction would get us at about 4.8% increase, I think that's important. I think it says to our taxpayers that while we have additional needs and we are going to continually see more needs as we attract more and more people to Gwinnett County, which they come here because it's a great place to live, great place to raise your kids, great place to educate your kids, and to see also the comparison with our neighboring districts. I think the other thing that's important to me is that in the midst of being able to reduce our millage rate by almost a full point in 4 years, there's no other district that's come anywhere close to that in a neighboring district. And if you look at the fact that we started the school year with basically less than 0.5% of our positions vacant, people want to be in Gwinnett.
This is true.
And we're paying them a competitive rate. And all of that we put to bed in May. Now we're funding it. Thank you for sharpening your pencil, finding a way for us to do that in a way that helps the taxpayer pay less in taxes. And in light of 582, allows us to continue to maintain control of the funding of the education of our students. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chief Millard, for all the detailed information you presented, and to your team as well. And I certainly echo a lot of what my fellow colleagues have said tonight in terms of the work that you have done to thoughtfully explain how we are going about funding our budget, where we're getting the money from, and how we are still being cognizant of our taxpayers and the money that we're collecting from them. And I think, there are, like I said earlier, there are decisions that we make here behind the desk that hit personal, and this one hits personal for me because I'm a homeowner, and as I'm sure everyone listening in here is homeowners to some extent, and we pay taxes. And we want the best of both worlds. We want to pay lower taxes, but we want high values in case we need to go resell our properties. And so this is kind of that fine balance we walk. And I think, have an understanding of how that process works and not look at the school as the sole reason why your taxes might be going up or in certain circumstances going down. I think it's important to understand that. It is the tax assessor that sits in their office, and they determine property values and they determine assessment values, and this is where the basis of our tax assessment starts on a yearly basis. So I think that's important for our folks to understand, and also to really understand the exemptions that are allocated to them, not only the homestead exemption, but the senior exemption. These are all very important exemptions, and you have talked about this in the past where you budgeted for these offsets, and I got to commend Ms. Vickers for coming tonight and talking about how she went off and filed her appeal, and I've done the same thing, and we as homeowners have that right to do that and go after those additional valuation exemptions to help kind of offset some of the pain and pressure, and I completely understand that. Hearing Mr. Knutson say, potentially a full mill point deduction in 4 years, that's a big deal, and that speaks to how we are really striving to be more fiscally responsible. Like I said, I side with Ms. Vickers on some of her sentiments. I came with them tonight as well. Sitting here and, watching us, have gone through 2 superintendents in 4 years and having to pay them out. That's a big deal to our community, to see that money going out and to seeing us spend over $1 million to buy out contracts. It's something that has created some discourse and discontent in the community, and I get that. And I think watching this current administration making some very positive strides in terms of the hiring freeze at the ISC, in terms of giving money to our teachers, giving pay raises to our teachers, supporting their retention, supporting all of those that support those that teach. And I think that's critical, especially during this time, to show that type of stability to our community. And really the work that you all are doing here is a testament to that. And I want to continue with the challenge that I posed this morning. I think we can get to 18.7 in terms of a millage rate for this upcoming fiscal year. And I think it's something that we are funding our budget to be operationally sound. We have a reserve budget that's very sound as well. And so I feel we are in a good spot based on all the information you provided here, and I encourage our folks and our public to go out and understand the budget and where the money's being spent. This team's built a beautiful page on where the money's being spent and how simple it is to access it. And I continue to just stress, please go out and look at this information and understand where GCPS is budgeting these dollars to be able to run our school system soundly, efficiently, and the best that we can be. So thank you again for what you're doing, and please keep up the good work.
My pleasure, Ms. Gasper. Our pleasure.
Thank you so much, Chief Millard, for the report, and thank you to the team, per usual, for the work that they put into helping to prepare this presentation for us today. If you could go to slide 16 for me. While you do that, I just want to acknowledge that this is certainly a delicate dance that we're doing here in trying to land on what's best for kids, while also understanding the importance in providing taxpayers with relief, right? Especially in these times where we see layoffs and the labor market reports and inflation, prices going up. So it's definitely a delicate balance that we're addressing with the decision that we have to make over the next week. So I just want to acknowledge that. Here on this slide, you listed some of the potential drawbacks. And if you could, can you speak a little bit about bullet number 5, bullet 6, impact on long-term stability and funding our programs? Can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. In terms of the programs that we currently have, during this process of analyzing whether or not it would be feasible to consider lowering the millage rate, we always want to consider what are the things that we've committed to, our strategic plan, starting there. Are there things we've committed to that we have to carry out and sustain, for a length of time? All of the knowns, all of the existing budget, with inflationary growths factored in, and all of the other factors that you use to kind of project budgets going forward. We can tell whether or not we would be consistent in terms of the way that we operate, which is to remain still fiscally sound, making sure that we continue the programs that we need that we absolutely must have, as well as being able to get ourselves positioned if there's any changes to legislation, whether it's the feds or the state, who knows. But certainly all of those are the things that we look at is some of the factors, I should say. Again, fund balance, it's important. And of course, looking at the programs that we need to optimize or streamline spending.
Thank you for that. If you could go back to slide 14 for me there. I just want to make sure I'm following. I appreciate you adding this additional column regarding a comparison of our per pupil expenses. Clearly, we've been conservative compared to the surrounding metro areas. If I'm reading this correctly, we are paying per pupil the least amount compared to our peers. Is that correct?
Well, it appears that way, but it's technically that our expenditures are, we have the advantage of economies of scale. So because of our size, we're able to really reduce our expenditures in comparison to, say, other districts that don't have the economies with the largest budget, largest school district. So we benefit from that. So our costs would be lower in terms of looking at our enrollment factors. You see what I'm saying? So it appears that way, but it's really not. It's really because it's the economies of scale factor.
The economies of scale factor. So with that being said, and maybe you provided this before, but I think it would be helpful for the public to have access to the information as well. Is it possible at our next meeting to compare to a similar district of our size, if you're saying that's the reason why we have the difference here is strictly based on the number of students being served, if I'm understanding you correctly?
No, not strictly. It's a factor in terms of the calculation. So if the enrollment number in proportion to what you would have expected is off, it's usually because the expenditure proportion is either higher or lower. And in our case, we should probably be spending more based upon our enrollment size, and we're not, which means we're actually appearing to be lower, but we're actually doing better because we have the power of leveraging lower prices and lower costs.
No, and I'm following you. We are able to negotiate because of our size, correct?
Oh, yeah.
That's what you're saying?
Yep, usually it's a huge factor.
So what I'm asking is if we find a district of a similar size, I'm assuming they have the same amount of negotiating power, and maybe that assumption is incorrect. You can enlighten stakeholders.
Should be.
But I'm interested in how much they're spending per pupil as well. The reason I'm asking this is because there is some research to support that the amount of spending has a correlation to academic achievement. I don't know how true that is or is not, but I am interested in how we're spending compared to our surrounding area, which you provided that. But when you tell me that we are spending less because of economies of scale and because of our negotiating power, now I would like to see how we compare to other districts with a similar number of students to compare more apples to apples, I guess.
We should have that information. I believe I already have that information.
Right, so if you
yeah.
could provide it at the next meeting and include it so our public is also aware, that would be helpful.
Sure.
Thank you so much. I would also like to talk about here on the slide, when you, in the bottom half of the chart, the per pupil expense. So if we decrease the millage rate to 8.7, you're saying that would not impact the per pupil expense because it's the same for both rates?
No, we haven't changed anything to do with the pure pupil because that was the budgeted number. Yes, that's the budgeted number. So everybody's budgeted number.
Based on a budgeted number, not based on what we'll actually bring in. One other thing I'd like to note in this moment, I heard Mr. Gasper mention, I think you're in favor of the additional millage decreased to 18.7. And again, I understand the benefit to taxpayers. I question if that's the best thing to do in this moment, in part because of, and Ms. Vickers hinted on this in her comments, the number of schools that we have that are overcrowded. The revenue we bring in should be able to support creating additional space for students, correct?
Well, now you're talking about two completely different funding sources.
Okay, so is that strictly SPLOST then that
is
covers?
strictly capital project funding.
Strictly capital, which
Correct.
is SPLOST.
This has nothing to do with.
Okay, this has, so there is no way this funding can address overcrowded schools.
No, that's not to say that it cannot.
So talk us through it a little bit, please.
Obviously, your general fund, your general operating budget is a completely unrestricted budget, which means the board has the authority to really determine what's needed, you know. Obviously, there's certain things that we have to comply with, but your capital projects funds, that's for a special purpose, as you know. That's for your capital programs. And so with what the state gives you, or does not give you in most cases, you really don't have any other way of getting significant funding other than going into debt, so borrowing. Your operating budget is really really geared towards direct instruction or instructional resources and programs. The two really and truly have to be separated, but it's what it's in your referendum, essentially, that you vote for. That's what you need to be using your capital projects plus funds for. In this case, you can use anything under your general fund operating budget, but that's where you want to focus your instructional programs. And that has requirements too.
So
in the
just to
state
be
board rules.
clear, what I heard you say is that we have a capital budget. We also have the general fund budget,
Right.
which we typically do not use for capital
Correct.
expenses, but we can.
You are able to. Mhm.
Okay, I just want to make sure the community is clear about that. We can use the general funds to support building schools or adding additional space to schools. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So at a time where we have nearly 80 trailers in the Brookwood cluster, which means we have 80 classrooms in trailers, and based upon the survey and the feedback from our community, there was a focus on safety and security. And we talked about how at this time it's difficult to ensure safety and security in the trailers. It's not comparable to being in the schoolhouse. So there is a threat there to safety that students in the schoolhouse don't experience. 80 trailers in the Brookwood cluster, nearly 60 in Grayson, same in Parkview, nearly 50 in Shiloh. And I understand that this is not the case in all clusters. So I understand why maybe not all of us are as concerned about children maybe being in trailers, but it is a concern for me in thinking about these numbers. I feel as though our feedback from the community expressed it as a priority to ensure the safety of our students. And so I'm wanting to understand how we're planning to address the fact that we have so many trailers across the district, and how we can reconcile that with further lowering the millage rate. Because my understanding is we're now foregoing funds that could be used to alleviate overcrowding. I don't know if that's a question for you or Dr. Taylor.
No, I think it's a very fair question. I think it's an appropriate question. Obviously, the long-term planning of addressing the capital needs is Chief Mallard was saying, more appropriately suited for the capital fund. If you remember back to the budget presentations, and I don't have all the numbers right here on the top of my head, but I'm sure you do.
I think it's 252.
Yeah, no, I'm
252
saying
million.
when we're talking about the general fund, the lion's share is dedicated towards salary. Right?
Correct.
And there is, if you remember back, and I'm trying to put you on the spot because I know you don't have that chart right here, but if you remember back to the budget presentation, there's a sliver of the general fund that was dedicated for capital outlay for that. What you're talking about being able to do, we couldn't sustain in the general fund. We might be able to chip away at it, spliced and kind of that long-term planning for, and that capital plan. That's what it's for. That's what that particular budget is for. To be able to address some of the challenges that you described, we could, but there's some choices that would have to be made. When we talk about, being competitive from a salary perspective, that would be a piece that's on the table, and we would have to start kind of scaling that back. Thinking about the programming that we try to, create highly engaging opportunities for students. Those would be some of the opportunity costs that we would have to scale back on if we were going to be looking for the general fund to sustain some of that, addressing some of that growth. And so, whereas there is obviously the flexibility and we are allowed to do so, there would be some tough choices that would have to be made if we had to depend on our general fund budget to sustain staff and not have disruption to services, and use that same budget to address some of those overcrowding issues.
Well, I think in public education, we're in the business of making tough choices. I will say that, I understand that we have a waiver around class sizes. Personally speaking, it concerns me when I think about a K-2 classroom, how many students per teacher we have in some of our classrooms. Particularly of interest is how many students we have in some of our classrooms of our schools that are not performing on par with their peers, and how evidence has shown that smaller class sizes could support higher academic achievement. It sounds to me that there could be some intentionality around trying to address that, which would need to be in an innovative way, it sounds like. And as you mentioned, your words, chipping away, we could chip away at that possibly, utilizing general funds. So I just wanted to highlight, this idea of reducing the millage rate further to 18.7 in light of the number of trailers we have and the class sizes that we're experiencing. That's something that I'll have to further think about, but I wanted to uplift that for the community, that we have to also be thinking more broadly beyond just this year around how we're going to address the fact that our third graders are struggling in reading, right? Mm-hmm. And as mentioned, class size could be a way to address that. I just feel that we need to be thoughtful around how we could be leveraging the money that we have in our budget to be thinking more long-term. And if we decide to lower it even further, how much longer does that mean we're gonna have 80 trailers in the Brookwood cluster, 60 in Grayson, 60 in Parkview, 50 in Shiloh? I just challenge the district to continue to think about that and ask that my colleagues continue to think about that as we approach a final decision in the next week.
Here's what I would say is we're talking about two different things. All the things you're talking about are budgetary questions that should have been discussed and were discussed, and a balanced approach to our budget was established and approved in May. All of this is, all your concerns have to do with what is in our budget. We cannot just simply say, oh, our community just had a windfall, so therefore let's take advantage of that and take money that we have not approved to spend just so that we can have it for later to do something with. That's not fiscal responsibility. We've passed a budget. It has to be balanced. Now we have the opportunity to look at what has happened with our assessed values and find the way to fund our past budget. Going into next year, now you begin to talk about, okay, how do we deal with trailers? How do we deal with overcrowding? That's all part of the budgetary conversation that takes place over the year. And what I would say is the one thing that nobody's brought up is redistricting is one of the biggest ways that you deal with this. But the question then has to go to the community. I don't want my child in an overcrowded school, but I also don't want to leave the Grayson cluster. I mean, I hear that all the time. I've got a couple of elementary schools in my area where we could shift and have very good balance between two elementary schools. But the community will say, we don't want to go to that school. We'd rather deal with the trailers at our school than to shift. So it's a bigger question. It goes well beyond just the money, and it's a question that we're beginning to have. We're beginning to talk about. We have to have it because of the new Mary Kay Murphy Middle School. So we're going to have to move some stuff around to make sure that that school gets filled with kids. And we did that because of the population, the growth in the Archer area. We'll be working on those things, but it's not the sort of thing that you can just. Mill Creek, for many, many years, had almost 4,000 students in a building built for 2,700. So, it happens from time to time in different parts of our county. And the reason that we've been successful doing what we've done and doing it with less, look at these numbers that you're comparing to. We're right in the same ballpark with twice as many kids. The nearest district to us has about half our kids. And so yet they're raising almost the same amount from their constituents, which that gives them more money to spend. We are in the bottom 50% of wealth per student. That's why we spend less per student, because we don't have the tax digest to, if we were to pull in the same amount percent, people would no longer want to live in Gwinnett because of the cost of living in Gwinnett. We can't do that. There's always going to be a balance. But we're here to discuss how we fund our approved budget. And how we fund our approved budget is not by creating more in reserves. We have a good, healthy reserve balance. We'll still be in a good position from a reserve perspective. We need to do right now what our taxpayers have asked us to do, which is to fund our budget. And I believe that our budget can be funded at the same time giving some tax relief to the people of Gwinnett County. And it's not, I'm not responsible for tax relief for the rest of the state, but I asked our constituents, our property tax payers, to trust us that we would work with them if they, as a way to help them understand we want to control our budget and we want to control the sources of funding that the state has given us. This is one of those. So when we opted out of Bill 582, from my perspective, we have the mandate from the people to help them at this time with some property tax relief. And we can do that at the same time maintaining the control that I believe the board's elected and given the power to do. So let's continue the discussion, but let's discuss it when it's budget time, which is beginning now, because we'll start working on that as we roll into it, because it's a year-long process, right?
We'll start in September.
But right now, when it comes to funding, we don't have to raise 8% more when we've only increased our budget by about 5%. And the other thing I think you need to keep in mind is that if we could just continue with if we wanted to max out, we could max out our millage rate right now. Well, what good would that do us, right? Then if we fall on hard times and assessed values go down, we have nowhere to go. And so we are forced to deal with lower revenues. So right now, while we have the opportunity, as things are good, to reserve some of that for the future, if things do go the other direction, we can continue to fund the education that our kids need. That's the prudent thing to do. That's the fiscally responsible thing to do. That's why I'm supportive of doing what we can now, because we're not always going to have 8 or 10% increase in property values. And when it goes the other way, we've got to have the ability to find the money to educate our kids.
I would just like to say, if I may, Chairwoman Simmons, so what I'm about to say is there's a lot to unpack, so bear with me as I try to break it down. So I resonate with what Dr. Simmons has stated around overcrowding. I do not agree that it is an amendment of our budget, because when you look at the district's plan on slide 10, I know that you all have a priority for safety, and that's one of the questions that I asked around, and it's very hard to see, increasing safety and security, but you have it tagged as capital, which is SPLOST.
Correct.
And so when I look, not the general fund where property taxes, but SPLOST.
That's correct.
The sales tax that is up for renewal in a couple months. And so when I go back to slide 16 that Dr. Simmons mentioned, the potential drawbacks of lowering the millage rate, I see the potential state and federal cuts, but I did not see, is there a plan for if SPLOST, not amending our overall budget that we passed back in May, but are we accounting for the possibility that the voters do not vote to renew SPLOST? Is that a part of this plan?
Yes, it is. You might recall maybe 4 or 5 board updates ago, I provided a summary, I think, opening that shows our analysis of potential impacts of SPLOST and not having SPLOST. and measures and steps that would be looked at in terms of being able to plan for that. So sure, absolutely.
So can you provide me with that data? Because, and I've said this in previous meetings, overcrowding is probably the number one issue in District 1, as Ms. Vickers stated with Grayson. And I know in the past, we have the Mary Kay Murphy Middle School coming. We added the Harbins, and I know there's some plans going on in the background, but I would love to see what the district's plan is before next week, in the event that SPLOST is not renewed, and would we, like Dr. Simmons alluded to, need to pull from our general fund in the event that we want to address overcrowding in the trailers? Because as we mentioned, I think it was 2 months ago, that District 1, it's overcrowding. We know it's even in the Decula cluster. So would love to see that before or by next week.
If you will, go back to slide number 6 for me. Mr. Knudsen mentioned something about additional funds going into reserves. So which portion of this is going into the reserves?
What we're talking about is the fiscal year 2025's ending fund balance is significant. That, because it's not appropriated, it is going into the beginning fund balance for FY2026. The fund balance is growing significantly. This is only representing the additional revenue, but this is not looking at fund balance at all.
If we pull in more money than we spend, it has to go somewhere, and where it goes is
Correct.
the reserve fund.
That's correct.
That's what I'm trying to get answered is, okay, so we're pulling in more than we're spending. Which percent, are we pulling in 5.3% more than we're spending? I'm trying to get an understanding there.
No. What you're seeing there, that is representing what we would have to, if we did nothing and we took the additional funds, we would have to appropriate that additional amount. It wouldn't roll to fund balance because your final millage is actually resulting in additional funds to the budget. So you're going to add that to your budget.
So whether we land on an 8.8 millage or an 8.7 millage rate, it will be appropriated.
Correct.
So that's a little different than what I was understanding from what Mr. Knudsen was expressing. So it will be appropriated.
It would be appropriated.
It's appropriated at a lower rate.
It will be appropriated to our operations. It could be appropriated to capital. Is that correct? That's all I wanted to get an understanding around.
No, it couldn't. It couldn't be put into capital funds, but I think what you're alluding to is you could spend it on capital purchases.
Exactly.
Yes,
Yes, it could be spent on capital improvements. That's what I'm trying to get clear. Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
That's correct.
So, again, to my point, I would just like to reiterate what I am continuing to think about between now and next week, and I ask that my fellow board members think about it as well, in light of our community expressing safety as a priority, in light of the numerous trailers we have around the district, and we know that those are not as secure as being in the schoolhouse. In light of us, and I think we've already appropriated funding to place SROs in every school, if I'm not mistaken, so we've covered that. We haven't yet covered how we're going to address the number of trailers across the district. It appears to me that we have an opportunity to think about how we could leverage funding here to start thinking about that and planning for that. I just wanted to elevate that thought amongst the group, that this is a funding source that could be considered to start chipping away at the overcrowding. I don't deny that SPLOST could help us, is going to help us to address that. If it's passed in November, I don't deny that. There's also a possibility SPLOST isn't passed, to Mrs. Stone's point. So I just want us to consider if we're lowering this another tenth of a mil, that's going to be less funding that we have to appropriate to some other priorities that have been identified by our community. And I just wanted to uplift that today. Thank you so much again for the presentation. Any other comments, team? If there's no further business, I need a motion to adjourn this meeting.
I move that we adjourn this second millage rate hearing.
I have a motion by Mr. Knutson. Is there a second? The motion is seconded by Ms. Stone. Is there any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. It is unanimous. We are adjourned. Thank you all.